in the past, it's like it's, all warm and fuzzy and, oh, it's when two people love each other. No, it's none of that.
Hello, I'm Elle Harris, and thank you for checking out the 7 podcast. Today's episode is about marriage, and with me today, you're going to see one of my good friends, Danielle. And I chose Danielle because she's been married for over 2 decades. She comes with a lot of experience, and I feel like she has been pretty much, she doesn't know this, but a mentor to me in marriage, making sure that you know the difference between, your expectations and reality of marriage. So I hope you like this episode. I loved it. Check it out.
My name is Danielle Clarke, and apparently I'm Elle's good friend. I live right outside of Washington, D.C. I do a lot of different things, so I don't even know how much detail you want me to give, but I'm Elle's good friend, and I'm happy to be here.
Yes. You are the funny part is you're so shady, so even you saying good friend could just mean so many things.
Right? Just
But
like
she,
a good girlfriend.
yes,
That's what
I
we say
would
to
even
people.
say I'll say big sister because she older than me. So,
Wow, shade. Okay.
but no, seriously, like even I would just say to the marriage world, and that's why I wanted you to be a part of this, just because of your, history of length of being married, also just your career, in counseling and having that marriage piece in your counseling profession. And then just for my personal life and just how you've poured into me, being a married woman, I think that I've always been under the thought that you keep what goes on in your marriage, and you don't tell other people unless you have a safe place to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And with you, I think I know I have that because I can say something and it's not going to be a Elle, you're right. It's Elle, check yourself. And I think that's the only time when you're able to really have those conversations. So because I know how authentic you are about that, I felt like who would be better than to have this conversation with. So
I appreciate that. Yeah. Just so you guys know, I'm been married for my husband Donald and I have been I can't even talk. Celebrated 20 years in May. We got married really, really young, way before we should have. But by the grace of God, we have maintained this marriage. And as Elle spoke about, I do a lot of marital counseling. I'm a licensed and ordained minister. So I've married couples. My husband and I, we do a bunch of premarital counseling. And then in my individual practice, I do a lot of work with women, but also with married couples who have been married for 6 months and couples who have been married for over 30 years. And so I've just kind of gleaned a lot of insight to share with others, but also that helps to strengthen my marriage. So, yeah, I'm excited about this conversation.
yeah, so let's jump in. So the first question, what is marriage in your definition? Like how do you define marriage?
So it has changed over the course of my 20 years of being married, and certainly working with married couples. I think the definition that I've landed on most recently is a partnership. And I look at it from a legal perspective. I'm an attorney also. And so when I think about what a partnership is legally, it's a legal arrangement or a legal agreement that forms a business. For me personally, that business is a ministry. And so when we think about partnership, when you come in, it's a 50-50 partnership, it's a split. Both of you have ownership over this business, this ministry, whatever it is, also responsibility for the success of it. But the thing I think is most important is like when you look at it from a legal perspective, when you establish a business, a legal entity, it has to fall under a state. And the state has the governing laws, right? And in marriage, for me, because it's a ministry, it's not just it's like a religious nonprofit, right?
Right,
So
right.
it falls under the laws of the state, but also we have placed our marriage under the laws of the kingdom of God. And so God kind of leads and directs and tells us what's expected within our marriage, right? So I think that that's kind of where I've landed so far. But are you committed to making it work? And I think about legal partnerships and how difficult it is to kind of sever that, right? You
Right.
can't just willy nilly wake up one day and say, no, there is a decision process that has to go through. And same way with marriage, right? Who wants to go through all of that? So you have to be committed to making it work And the beauty of what I found over 20 years is that if you hold fast to that commitment, feelings will change, emotions will change, circumstances will change, and what you felt or didn't feel a year ago has this beautiful way of coming back
Mhm.
if you hold on to that commitment. So I think that that's where I've landed, at
That
least
is so,
on
that's
today.
good.
On today.
Right,
On
today.
today.
That is so good. And I agree with you. I think like we my husband and I talk a lot about like the marriages that we look at and like the ideal marriage or like our standard for marriage, right? And I talk a lot about my mom and my stepdad because they got married after 4 months of knowing each other. And so, me as a young 11-year-old when they got married, I was like, oh, they're not gonna be married long. Like he'll be here for a little while. And to see them today, 28 years this month of marriage, like that is crazy to me. And it's because could love was love there in the beginning? They probably loved each other like on a but where was it it wasn't that like long enough to have that full right, but they
Yeah.
knew what they both wanted.
Yes.
They saw potential, they saw purpose, and they entered into it like a partnership, like you just stated. And so that was my thought process of going in this. Is it someone that I can dream with? Is it someone who has like their business, their own things going on because I know where I want to go?
Yeah.
And if they don't have vision for their own life, they're not going to be able to handle the vision for my life.
Yeah.
And can that person be my friend?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
can I genuinely like them before even loving? Because I can have to love you because God told me that, right? But I don't
Yeah.
have to like you. So can I like you forever? And what I think also just like what I wish I had done in the beginning, what I'm learning on this side of defining marriage and hopefully helping someone else is am I healthy enough or healed enough to go in that? And we'll talk about trauma a little bit later, but because if not, when I entered the relationship with my husband, I was like, well, I'm jacked up. I'm 100 shades of jacked up. So if you can love me, then you must be all right. But sometimes you could be so clouded by your own life that you don't pay attention to the life of the person in front of you.
Yeah.
And if they have their own scars, and if some of those things will further down the line trigger you, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So it's
Absolutely.
like, it's that true, like you said, that when you're getting ready to enter into a partnership or an agreement with someone, reading everything
Yeah.
up front. Like whatever you thought, whatever you want to communicate, let's talk about this before going in there because I think that marriage has become a trend.
Yes.
It's a trend of I want to look good, I want to have a beautiful wedding, I want everyone to fall in love with the love story.
Yeah.
How can I make money off of this? I know like after I got married, everybody who I saw getting married, they ended up wanting to be event planners. But now everybody's getting married and they want to be influencers, right? So it's like how outside of that, like where is it still whole? Is there still quality there? So I think that marriage has definitely turned. So even speaking to that, looking at how do you make that last? Like after that warm and fuzzy, because people say like the first year is like the honeymoon stage. And I think the first to for me, I think I had been good for the first 8 years. It wasn't until the child came in that
Yes.
life just shook me to the core. So maybe that's. So what do you feel like is the lasting thing to marriage? What's the key?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about my marriage, I think one thing that was key is because I look at marriage as a ministry, right? And that this won't be the case for everybody. It was so my submission to God positively correlated with my satisfaction in marriage. The more I submitted to God, the happier I was in marriage, the more settled I was, the more satisfied I was. And that goes back to sort of what are your governing rules, right? So the moment that we kind of settled on what the rules are for our marriage, and then we both submitted to those rules, I think it just put us on an even playing field. So, sort of a back way of answering your question, I think you have to know what rules you're playing by. You're entering into this partnership. What are the rules? What are the guidelines? What's the structure? And I find that most couples don't talk about what that framework looks like for that individual, right? So each of you has a blueprint for love. and for marriage. It is ingrained in you. It was taught to you either from your family, family of origin, everything you've read, everything you've watched on TV, every experience you've had, every trauma, every joy, all of the marriages that you've witnessed in your family. So you have a blueprint for love, how you receive love, how you give love, how you operate in relationship. Most people don't know what that blueprint is. They don't even recognize that they're operating off of a blueprint, right? And so you have two people that are coming together to build this thing, working off of two different blueprints.
Right.
And you're like, the kitchen goes over there. And you're like, no, the kitchen goes over there.
Right.
And it's like, no, 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 no. The laundry room is going to go upstairs and no, 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 no. The laundry room goes downstairs. It's based on how you were raised, sort of all of that information that you've taken in and how you processed it, right? And so when we get in marriage and we don't have those conversations about what are the rules, what rules are we operating on, what's our blueprint, then you just start discovering things along the way and you don't really know how to make the adjustments.
Yeah.
To have a lasting marriage, you've got to bring those blueprints up. Because a lot of them are subconscious, right? So you got to bring them up to the conscious level. And then you've got to be able to communicate those with your partner.
Mm.
And when you begin to communicate those with your partner, then you all can make a decision about what the blueprint for your marriage looks like. A lot of people who grew up with, intact families, like with a mother and father, you are operating based on that blueprint. Either you're saying, I don't want to look nothing like them, or I want my marriage to look exactly like them, right? Or you're cherry picking things, right? And so you don't recognize it. So you have to have those conversations. And I think that happened for my husband and I. I think we were probably in year 10 or 11.
Mm.
And we started going to counseling. And we had an amazing therapist, Miss Izola, old lady. She was probably in her season, had been married for 50 years.
Mm.
And she changed the trajectory of our marriage by helping us to understand that we were playing by different rules. We were running a business off of two different sets of bylaws, really.
Right.
And so we started talking, and I recognized that a lot of the stuff that I thought was wrong with my husband was based on what he learned in childhood, right? And the same thing, he saw in me. It's like, oh, I was taking that personally. Or I thought that was stupid. Now I have a better understanding of why you are the way that you are and why you would do the things that you do or why you had those expectations. And so then we could say, okay, that's how we were raised. That's what
Yeah.
we thought. But does it work for us? Does it
Yeah.
work for us? And so it wasn't until year 11 that we decided on what worked for us and got all of those uncommunicated expectations and really created a safe space for us to talk about our expectations and to even come back and say, I had that expectation, but now I change it.
Mm.
I thought I wanted to do that. I don't want to do that anymore. Right. And so we can have a space where we can kind of say, we can come to the table and adjust. Right. So for a lasting marriage, you have to know what the rules are. You got to be able to communicate them. Right. And again, for me, because I said this is a marriage and God is going to set a lot of the rules. If I'm not submitted to God, I'm not going to be happy in marriage
Right.
because he's going to be asking and requiring things of me that I'm not willing to do. And so once I begin to fully submit to him and allow him to shape me and to mold me in the ways that he wanted to, now again, I see my satisfaction in marriage increasing
Yeah.
because I'm now submitted to the rules, right? And a lot of people have rules that they don't want to submit to. Like, this is your rule, but you ain't even following it. So, and I mean, I was guilty of that too, right? I'm still
Yeah.
guilty of that. I'm not gonna, let me not say past tense. I'm still guilty of that. But yeah, I think that is key. I think that's key. I think processing childhood trauma, to your point about having stuff, you have to deal with what has come up for you in childhood, what's
Mm.
remained buried from childhood. You got to deal with that because that is dictating and running, it's shaping the course of your life.
Yes, it is.
And so you have to process that. I'm not saying you have to be healed from it because healing can be a lifelong journey. You got to
Right.
recognize it and you got to begin the work of processing it so
Yeah.
that when you are triggered, you understand the why and your spouse can understand the why. And then the other, there's a pastor that once said, he was talking about his anniversary, and he said, yeah, when I was going through therapy, my therapist told me the healthiest parts of me chose my spouse.
Hmm. Wow.
And I
I like
started think,
that.
yeah, and I started thinking about, because it was, he was like, I don't deserve her.
Right.
I don't deserve her. Like, I don't know how I ended up picking the right wife. And he said, the healthiest parts of you picked. And I think about relationships that I've had, and the unhealthy parts of me
That's where I was going.
picked yes. And let me say
Yes.
this. Let me say this to some degree. I've had this conversation with my husband because I was a whole hot mess when we got married.
Yeah.
I was a whole hot mess. And many of the reasons that I selected, that I said he's the one, they were coming from unhealthy parts of me.
Mm.
So I don't want anyone to think like they're in a marriage or they're listening to this in their marriage right now and they're
Right.
like, oh my God, like the unhealthy, it can still it
Yes.
can still work.
It
And
can
I'm
still
not,
work.
abuse aside and all of those sorts of
Yeah.
things. If you're not experiencing abuse in physical or verbal or emotional forms, this is for you, right? Get out if you are, if you're being abused. But that wasn't the case in my marriage. But the unhealthy parts of me sought things out in my husband. And I think my husband would say the same thing, you know.
Right.
And so, but we were committed to making it work and to heal together. And
Hmm.
God has created something beautiful from that willingness to submit, right? So
Right.
there's still hope. Don't like, well, Danielle said I gotta get out because the unhealthy. No, that's not what I'm saying.
We got
We
yeah,
got
I got
it. Just
you.
is going to require more work. You're going to
Yeah.
go through the healing process with this person as opposed to you healing and then they healing and then you all coming together, right? So it's
Right.
going to be a heavier load for sure, and it's going to require more patience, more tolerance, but it can be done. But yes, you've got to process that childhood trauma and friendship. You said the other thing. You've got, if you didn't start off with friendship, a lot of y'all were just hiding the pants and y'all were really attracted, and sex was good and sort of all of those things. And that's what, and you just loved them and you were passionate about them. And, or maybe that wasn't the case, but it's like, oh, this person is very driven. I want a certain kind of lifestyle. This is a person that I can
Good.
partner with and get that. That's fine. You've got to find a way to develop a friendship, right? Even
Yeah.
if you didn't start off that way. My husband and I started off as friends. So we've always been friends. And really, that's the thing that has kept us together, I think, for so long because we genuinely enjoy being around each other. I mean, how could he not enjoy being around me? I am hilarious.
Listen.
I make life fun. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but we were friends. We like to do things together. We like to play games together. We enjoy each other. And so even
Yeah.
if you don't have that, you have to do that. And I find that most of the times people are better to their friends than they are to their spouse. So if you have that,
Mm.
then that's just an added benefit. People are more patient with their friends. They're willing to go out of their way for their friends, right?
Right.
And so having that as a, sort of backbone for your marriage is only going to help you in times where kids come or jobs lost, all of those sorts of
Yeah.
things, because that person should be the person that you can't wait to run and tell or to share or to go through those difficult times with. And so sometimes when I'm mad at my husband, I'm like, dang it. I just want to call him and tell him what happened just now, but I can't because I'm mad at him.
Right.
But it's that thought, right? Because he's my
Hmm.
he's my person.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so I think that those are, just to
Mm.
recap because I said a lot. I know I was talking a lot.
That's
You got to
okay.
make sure that you know the rules and that you guys
Right.
agree on them. You got to process that childhood trauma and then you got to be friends. That's how you get
Mm.
to 20 years at my young age.
Right. Because you got married at 7.
I did. Thank you. My mother
So,
signed off on it.
but I think that is so real. And it's that, I think that we forget. So I think what happens is like if you go to marriage counseling, especially like in the church and stuff like that, you hear people say, "Oh, you got to communicate," and "Oh, don't go to sleep upset." And like we take those things for granted because they're said so much, but
Hmm.
communication, you would literally be upset about something that's not even real because you have formed this thought in your head. You've answered the question for them.
Yep. Yep.
And that's so unfair. Now I'm angry with you because I've answered what you're gonna say in my head,
Yep.
and that wasn't even your answer.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's like that communication thing is so real.
Yeah.
It is so real. And I think for me, what was probably my hindrance on like communication, like I would have those moments where I'll be upset, but for me, it was the way to manage my trigger. So I know that I grew up, you know, before my mom married my stepdad. I saw a lot of arguing in my house, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming. And so that was something that I never wanted for my marriage.
Yeah.
And so I remember my husband, he was going through therapy. He was like, he came home one day and he said, his therapist said, y'all have a really polite marriage. I said, this heifer said, what? I probably didn't call it heifer. I probably said something else.
You probably did.
I wanted that close God
Right.
and it took a minute because I felt like you're attacking my marriage first. You're attacking me and you don't know.
Yeah.
But I could see why. And so I had to, once I got out my feelings, I had to explain to my husband why I was that way. And I said, like, whenever there's something going on that makes me upset, if I need to have a conversation with my husband, I'll sit on the floor.
Yeah.
And I'll put my hands underneath me. I have to do all of those things to make sure that I don't get up in your face and smack you, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be that, right? Because that's managing a trigger, because my mind has seen that that is the correct way to handle, to yell, to scream, to do those things. That is not something that I want for my life.
Yeah.
I don't think it's healthy. So what I have to do is I have to take a second. I got to breathe. I got to process. And I have to make sure that I'm calm and I'm thinking from a rational space, right? So, but if I don't communicate that, it looks like I'm just this sweet person and we're having this conversation in the, right? So, but if you don't communicate, because some people look at arguing as passion, right? Like, you want to fight for me. Like, I want to see that because that lets me know that you love me.
Yeah.
No, I'm still angry,
Yeah.
but I know how to manage my anger in a way that doesn't make it harmful for our marriage, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that is one of those things. And one of the things that you taught me, God, you taught me this. And it's so funny because I was literally cleaning up my house yesterday and I heard your voice. So like one thing that like my husband is very junky, right? Let's just go ahead and put it out there. You know, I'm messy too. I have my moments, but I can only live in it for so long.
Yeah.
And so I was in here and I was like, oh my God, I can't do this no more. He need to clean up his side of the room. And so I remember hearing your voice. Why can't you do it, Elle? Why can't you do it? Do it as if you're doing it unto the Lord. Like every time I want to yell or scream and be like, they better come and clean this house up. These kids and his husband and his dog. I hear you saying that and I'm like, all right, Elle. Because what I do understand is when I live in that space consistently, I don't have to say anything because everybody follows the model that I'm representing.
Yeah.
Right? Like and though it hurts my pride, because it's like, I ain't got to do all of this. Okay. I'm tired.
I shouldn't have to. That'll kill a lot of marriages. I shouldn't have to.
I should not have to do any of this. However, if I get outside myself, if I sit down my pride and get it done, then I set the model, right?
Yeah.
And then I will work the rest.
Yeah.
That is something, it has been hard to hold my tongue because I am very confrontational. However,
no.
I know, not me, but it's it's the communication thing. Like it's that I don't want anything not said, right? I don't want, because I know what happens. You'll keep holding things in, and then the last straw will be somebody tied their shoe the wrong way, and you just snap on everybody, right? Because you've been holding all of these things in.
Yeah.
But now is it really that serious?
Yeah.
Is it really that serious? If I can do it and I have the capacity to do it, I'm going to get it done.
Yeah.
Well, am I upset a little bit? Yeah, but I'm going to get it done. So I think those are the things that like we have to figure out. Is it really worth the argument today?
Yeah.
How can I manage this? Like, because we get married and we don't know how to stay married. Once that first day is over, the rest of your life is about staying married. Yeah. Like you don't just get him or you don't just get her and it's over.
We know how to be in a marriage. I mean, we know how to have a wedding. That's what we know how to
We
do.
know how to have a wedding, and then we think it's over. Got
Mhm.
him. It's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
No, it don't work that way. And we work really hard. It's like getting the job, right?
Yeah.
You work really hard to get the job. You dress nice, you interview well, you show up early, all the things. But once you get the job, you got a whole attitude that you have the job that you've been praying for,
Yeah. Yes. You
and you
know,
don't want it anymore.
yeah, one of the things that just came up for me, I was actually talking to my oldest, my son, about this. We don't do a good job of teaching our children about marriage in an intentional way, right? A
Hmm.
lot of what they get is just from witnessing or what they pick up on, and you really don't know if what they pick up on is reality because they've gone through they got their own lives, they're going through their own stuff. And one of the things that I realized is that I wasn't intentional about, I mean, to a certain extent, right?
Hmm.
We were very intentional about letting our kids know that our marriage was the priority because it is the foundation upon which this family is built.
Right.
Right. So if there's a crack in that foundation, then the family suffers, right? So
Hmm.
we've got to prioritize this thing. And that's a good thing, not only for me and my husband, but for my kids as well. And so
Right.
they knew that. They knew their father came first, right? Because if
Yeah.
I put him first, then somehow they benefit from that.
Right.
This isn't a, I'm choosing my husband over my kids. No,
Hmm.
this is, I'm choosing the family.
Right.
And in choosing the family, I recognize that this is the foundation that
Hmm.
has to be, has to be taken care of, right? But my kid and I were talking about the importance of not putting them in the middle of our stuff. And I told him, like, when I was growing up, that was not the case. I was always triangulated into my parents' marriage.
Hmm.
And to, they're in a, their relationship is great now. They've been married for 47 years, but
Right.
at times, like, even when I was an adult, I felt like I was always in the middle, always playing middle person when things were going on. And I said to him, my son, I was like, I never wanted you all to experience that
Mm.
because I knew how harmful it was and
Yeah.
how it puts you in a position to choose between your parents, right? Or to manage your parents' marriage, right? You become the parent. And so he was like, yeah, you guys did a really good job of that. Like, I think back to my childhood, he was like, and that's one of the things that I remember. Like, it didn't matter if you all were upset with each other or what was going on. And he's the oldest, so he was privy to when we
Right.
were really young in marriage and we had no business being married and we had no business being parents because we were not healed enough. He said, yeah, we were never impacted by that. We
Mm.
still did the things that we were going to do. We still went to the games as a family. We still did all of that. And our marriage was whatever was going on in our marriage was between me and him, not
Right.
impacting the kids in that way. But I feel like we do have to be more intentional in including and teaching our children about how to operate in marriage. That's key for their success in relationships, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it does our kids a disservice when we prioritize them and don't, and our marriages suffer because
Hmm.
then they don't learn how to be in a relationship and how to create a rhythm for child rearing and
Right.
also, maintaining the relationship and nurturing that. So I think that that's important. But the other thing that I was going to say when you were talking, when you were saying like this whole conversation in your head, you've had the argument, then they come home,
Yeah.
they don't know why are you pissed off? Well,
Right.
I just argued with you for the past two
I
hours.
just
You don't
argued
even
with you
know
in
it.
my
You weren't
head.
even there, right? You weren't even there. I remember when I brought my husband up for the first time. We were living in Atlanta, and I brought him up to meet my grandparents. Both of them are deceased now, but they were married for a really long time, and they did everything together. And I'm not saying that that is the model, but I'm just saying like that's how close they were. And one of the things that my grandmother said to us, we were not even engaged. And for some reason, she really liked my husband, and she didn't like anybody. But she said, you have to make sure that you keep imagination and assumption out of your relationship.
Mm.
Imagination and assumption have no place in a marriage. She was
Oh, I
like, they
love
will kill your marriage. And I don't think I had a really good understanding of what she meant until I got married. I mean, it was probably several years in before I realized, like, that's what she was talking about.
that.
Because I
Mm.
was still in a lovey dovey stage with my husband, right?
Right.
Reality didn't hit until we had kids, which we had been married a year. No, we'd been married almost 2 years by the time we had our
Okay.
son. Yeah, that thing that happens in your head where you have orchestrated like a reality that has not yet happened, or that someone has done something and you have created their motives or their intent, the intention behind their actions, is so destructive. And when you talk to a lot of divorced couples or couples on the brink of divorce, you realize like, oh man, if we could just trace it all the way back like 3, 4, 5 years ago, that was the point in which you assumed something and you have been operating off of that assumption,
And living in it.
right? And so it just creates a false reality. And then that your partner is also operating off of that false reality, even though they don't know that they're operating off a false reality because they're just responding to whatever it is that you've done or said or whatever. So it's so dangerous. Imagination and an assumption.
Ooh,
And you hear it when you're having conversations with people.
yeah.
And it's like such and such and such. Well, why do you think that? Well, because da 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 da. Did they say that? Well, no. Did they do that? No. But because last time, okay, so you've made an assumption now because
That's
that's happened last time, right? Did you ask? Did you communicate? Or are you just having this one way conversation in your head? And so those two are, whew, if you can catch them and eliminate them, right? You will, you will be so, I'm not saying your marriage will be perfect, but you will be so much further ahead. You will be so much further ahead.
right.
That is so key. I think it's so key. U.S. Listen, I can't say Emma Lee McCune gave me that. Okay, God rest her soul. She had a lot of wisdom, but imagination and assumption. And so now, and I forget this. By no means is my marriage perfect, and I make a lot of mistakes. I probably make more mistakes than my husband does because I'm less tolerant than he is.
Yeah. Not you though. Not you.
That sounded a little shady, but yes, I'm not very patient. I'm not very tolerant. I'm working on it though. The Lord is working on me, but I think about like sometimes I catch myself having this argument and I'm like, ooh, girl, stop. Like, just stop. Wait until he gets home and ask the question. My mother would always tell me, assume good intentions, right? Assume that they were doing the thing that you wanted them to do, that they were doing the thing that was best for you. Assume that they were well meaning and start from there. And that is hard to do because my mind races. It's
I can't do
always
that one,
going.
Mama. Can't do that one, but I always
No,
have the
because
conversation.
it requires you to, because that's not who I am.
Right.
Like, that's just not who I am. That's not who I've become as a result of my trauma, right?
That's it.
My trauma has taught me that I need to always assume that somebody is out to get me, that's out
Assume
to
the worst.
hurt me, that
Yep.
they weren't thinking about me, right? That they weren't acting lovingly towards me, that they were being selfish. That's what my trauma taught me. And
Right.
so I'm like my train is moving 100 miles a minute and that requires me to put the brakes on like
Right.
stop, rethink this, reframe this. And so that's hard to do because momentum is pushing towards they knew exactly what they were doing when they did that. And so, but yeah, that is to assume good intentions requires you to cut off the imagination or assumption. Unless that imagination or assumption is no, 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 no. They were doing that. They meant to do, no, I'm just kidding. But you just have to make sure that
Of course
especially with
they
your
meant
partner, right?
right.
Because you do it with your friends.
We do. We
You do it
do.
with your friends. You do it with people that you barely know. They probably didn't mean it that way.
Yep.
You're always giving the benefit of the doubt to so many people, but not your spouse.
Hmm.
And that starts that hospitality, that radical hospitality, which is my phrase for the year. The area that I'm going to grow in requires that it starts at home, as my sister told me. It starts at home.
That's good. That's good. I would say we kind of touched on, and we can kind of go back a little bit deeper into trauma in children, but I put down three different words and how they affect marriages. So the trauma, the children, and dreams. And I want to go backwards. I want to go to dreams first because I think it was, and I'm not trying to make this super religious, but for me, I have to because that's my framework. And I think it was Paul who talked about it's better to not be married because then you can go and do the things that you're called to do. I wanted to get your thoughts on that because there's also a scripture that says two are better than one, right? So there's this like balancing of scales because I feel like there are some people who can get it right and they can balance the scales, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Okay? It's
Yeah.
hard. But then you have this person who you could be alone and you could soar and shoot, but then you're also alone,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So what are your thoughts on that?
So Paul's an interesting character. I have a lot of respect for Paul, but I have some issues with Paul. I think for Paul, again, it's so important, like when we're looking at the scriptures, to understand the full context, the work that he was called to do. And the people that he was talking to the disciples, he was talking to the apostles and those who were coming up to do ministry work, right?
Hmm.
And where they needed to go, because you look at Paul's life. Paul, once he was converted, he was all over the place,
Right.
setting up churches, spreading. They didn't have social media, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have any
Right.
of that. The word of God was literally being spread like as people were walking out.
Hmm.
They were going to different places and exposing them to this new gospel that was unknown and unheard to them, right? And so,
Right.
and in the midst of like opposition, where their lives were on the line, right?
Hmm.
And so Paul was speaking from a place of, I can't I can't do this work, put myself on the front lines, be in danger,
Hmm.
drag my family all over the place, right? Or leave them behind and have that mindset always like, I got to be thinking, I got to be thinking about my wife. I got to be thinking about my kids. Then what are they going to do? They got to marry she's going to have to marry my brother, all of these things, right?
That's not nasty at all.
Right, exactly. Who's going to take care of them? Or do I
Right.
bring them with me? And then I'm putting their life on the line. It's just,
Right.
it was too much weight for him to carry doing the work that he had to do. So,
Hmm.
for those of you who are called to the work, this is what Paul's saying. It is better that you not have those responsibilities because you've got to be able to pick up. And we might need to go back to Ephesus, and we might need to,
Right.
what I mean? And we might need to go to the Church of Corinth, all of
Right.
these things back and forth and back and forth. All of that to say that some people's dreams, the marriage is weighty.
Mm.
The responsibility of kids, it's weighty, right? And
Yeah.
so for some people's dreams, it isn't practical for them to be married, right? Because of the amount of sacrifice it's going to take.
Hmm.
And it is reckless
Hmm.
to be married and to have kids.
Yeah.
I don't want to start no drama. I really don't want to start any drama.
I
But I'm
got
going to go
you.
ahead and say this
Go
because
ahead.
I
Go
am who
ahead.
I am.
Yes,
I
you
took
are.
a class over the summer on MLK.
Hmm.
And in my paper, if you've studied MLK's writings, he talks about
Right.
the beloved community
Right.
and his responsibility to the beloved community and our responsibility as a people to the beloved community.
Hmm.
And he talks about, he lays out a framework. These are the things that we need to do in light of the beloved community.
Right.
And my paper challenged whether or not you can have a commitment to the beloved community when you are abandoning your own beloved community. And I used his family as his
Hmm.
beloved. That's your first beloved community, right? Ministry, marriage starts at home. And so
Right.
there was an abandonment of sorts in a lot of different ways. And I'm not even, this is not
Right. Right.
me
Right. Right.
tearing him down, but it's
Right.
just
Right.
reality. It's what we know. So for him to be absent from his kids, to be absent from his family, he made those sacrifices, and the country, the world benefited from those things.
Yeah, they
But I think
did.
that is, my paper explored exactly what you were saying
Yeah.
about what Paul was saying.
Yeah.
His family, right, had to make a lot of sacrifices. Even his death, right, would have been better for him not to have a family, not for them to have to endure those threats. Because you
Right.
read his writings and he's talking about, I'm up all night. People are threatening his life, threatening his family's life,
Right.
right? And he had beautiful children and a beautiful wife.
Yes.
We celebrate them still. But that kind of work, when you're called to that kind of work,
Hmm.
right? I don't know. I don't know,
Hmm.
right? That's not the case for everybody. Not everybody's an MLK, not everybody's a Paul.
Right.
Sometimes your dreams require you to have a partner.
Right.
Or maybe they're so big that you need to have somebody to come alongside you in order to be able to chase them,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that I see where Paul was coming from. For me,
Yeah.
my dreams, the things that God has placed in me, my goals, my aspirations, I can't imagine doing those things by myself. Plus, I'm just a really needy person and I need somebody to love me and take care of me. And my husband
You
does a
do
really good job.
not. You want to be a needy person so bad.
Listen, no, I am. I'm a needy person, but I just
Mhm.
refuse to depend on other people for to meet those needs. Okay. But I'm learning how to. God told me that help is love,
Okay.
and that I
Okay.
don't know how to receive help. Therefore, I don't know how to receive love.
That's a
And then it
real.
makes me feel unloved because I won't receive help. So I'm working on that, right?
That's good.
Um, Yeah, but I can't imagine doing this work alone, especially in the space of marriage. Everything about my experiences in the 20 years that I've been married has taught me what I need in order to be able to speak to others, right? I can talk to them from a place of authenticity because I've experienced the breadth of issues and problems in my marriage,
Hmm.
but have been able to overcome those things. So for my dreams, yeah, but are they has my marriage ever hindered? In some ways, I think at times, yeah, you know,
Yeah.
certainly having children has caused me to make sacrifices. I left seminary because I had small kids at home and I just couldn't be away from them. So I did a year and then I left. Now I'm back in because they're older and they're able to be more self-sufficient. But I don't know. Is it really the kids? Because maybe I should have been in seminary 10 years ago and I didn't do 20 years ago and I didn't do what I was supposed to do then, right? So I was too busy doing something else. Who knows?
I, I didn't say nothing.
That's the thing. So again, it's this, yeah, I mean, I hear Paul. I think it depends on the
The
dream.
minute, the dream, the dream. I think that's big. And I hear you, I hear what you're saying about Martin Luther King. And I think what's so interesting about that, I wonder on the other side of things, if there was ever a conversation where he said to his wife, like, this is what I'm doing. This is going to be a lot. And if she said, I'm down for the cause.
And she did. And she did. And
Yeah.
she did. She knew I think she knew going in, based on the research that I've done, going in what this was going to be and what was going to be required. Right. And, in my paper, I explored not just that piece, it was
Right.
more on like his documented affairs.
Let's be honest, because we
That's
here.
not taking care of the beloved community.
That's not. That's
That's
not.
not your beloved community, your family. That's harmful to them, right? Harmful to your legacy, but harmful to theirs. Yeah, he's a great man, did a lot of great
Yeah.
things, but
But
also,
everybody has their
but
weaknesses and where they
also,
fall short, right?
right? And that was harmful. So there's a hypocrisy there, right?
Yes.
And so I kind of spent a lot of time in my paper exploring that hypocrisy
Mm.
and how harmful that is, even how that model, though, and it's not unique to him, right? We see that in leadership in church all the time, an abandonment of their beloved community for the broader beloved community.
Your favorite person, David.
Let's not talk
And
about
we ain't
that
even
person.
gonna go there, man.
For the record, he is Elle's favorite person. He is not my favorite person. And I had to destroy her whole construct of David.
You did. But it's so real though. I think it's like those things that you're called to, you have to be careful. So because sometimes some dreams come with a lot of power, right?
Yes.
And then when that power comes, let's go back to the trauma, right? Like
Yeah.
all those things that you felt that were forsaken and that you lacked, you have power. So power brings so many things to you now. And you feel like I can get it. If she don't want to spread it when I get home,
Yep.
I have the power to do it, right?
Yep.
And sometimes the dreams come with all of these amenities, let's
Yeah.
call it, right? You can have more things at your exposure. So you do have to be careful. I think for me, because I have dated, we've had talks about toxic relationships. I have a lot of toxic relationships, and being in a place where you're used to dating people who their goal is to, like, people can see who you are even
Hmm.
before you can see it, and their goal is to tear you down and to
Yeah.
remind you of what you feel about yourself so that you can't go forth, right? And I think like being in that space of like not really knowing who I am yet, but you can see it. So let me tear you down, and then I would ever move forward, with my dream. For me, like I'm that person that, because it's a toxic thing. Sometimes I thrive on negativity. Like you tell
Hmm.
me that I can't do something,
Yeah.
let me show you wrong. I have time today to show you wrong, right? And so I remember that dating a guy, and we were dating when I started grad school, and he was just like, yeah, he was like, you got accepted in Norfolk State, like anybody can get accepted there. He didn't have not one degree. Okay, let's start not one, not even 5 degrees of separate. Yeah, so he said that. I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm gonna still go to grad school here,
Hmm.
and not only am I gonna go here, I'm gonna get a 4.0. And I did, and in that process, he was transitioned out. And at the very end of my program, my husband and I reconnected, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
Also, so I think that, but when we started dating, it was that like, all right, two people. I don't have to worry about him seeing me as somebody who's better than him
Yeah.
or seeing me as someone that he has to tear down.
Yeah. That's
Because
so good.
he has his own thoughts. I have my own thoughts, but we both have a mission, and we're willing to help each other accomplish that mission. And that goes back to that friendship thing.
Yeah.
It's so fun to be able to dream, with my husband, and like having those conversations is amazing. And just to bring it to the children part, as we talked about, is hard. Like, I'm so happy I didn't have a child in my first or second year of marriage,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I'm happy that. So I think sometimes we have to look at the blessing even in that, like us looking at it as, oh my God, like this is year 8 and we're still not pregnant.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we have to really think like, God, am I mature enough? Because
Whew.
I'm not. I don't think we'll be married. I don't think we'll be married today if we had a child at year 1 or 2. I
It's
really
hard.
don't.
It's
Right? And
hard.
that is hard work.
Yeah.
And I think you have to have a stable enough relationship. Some people make it work. Some people can have a baby day one coming in and move forward, right? But I think that for us, what God had for us, it had to be at that time. And I look at the symbolism, everything. 8 is new beginnings, and so that was a new beginning for us. And now learning who are we as parents? We've never done this before.
Yeah.
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 You had to tell me several times to humble me, Elle, you are not a better parent. But you would say it a little harsh, like, oh, so you think you better. That's what you would say.
Now, Elle, I would never say that. I
You
would
think you better. I
never.
know you're trying to talk real cute and stuff to
I
daddy.
would never.
And so, but it's learning all of those things and
Hmm.
learning the things that, because and like even with that, like learning that it's not just my child.
Yeah.
So often does my husband have to say like, I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna go here. Can you watch Zion? Watch her. That's my child. But for me, I've
Yeah.
been a mom since I was 7. Like when my
Yeah.
mom had my little brother,
Yep.
we had to help. I had to help raise him so she could go to work. So I'm used to having to ask permission to go places when I'm taking care of a child.
Right.
Trauma, right?
Yes.
So trying to move my head out of the space of like, I got to get somebody to take care of her so I can go do, baby, it's hard. And you don't know, you do not know what will present itself until you are faced with the problem. So
Yeah.
it's like it's all of these things, and it's such a big thing. And now you have to, how do two people come together? How do I listen to your stance on how we should do this? How do you listen to my stance on how we should do this? How do we not put our child in therapy for us? That's like one of my biggest goals. I don't want her to be on the couch saying, because my mama is crazy.
Listen, let me help you. She's gonna be on the couch saying my mama was crazy, regardless of what you do. Even as well intentioned as we are,
Thanks. Thank you.
we are, right? Because So two things that came to me, and I know you and I have kind of talked about this, like there's nothing that's going to prepare you for having kids.
Hmm.
You can, let me say this, do the work internally, right? Do
Hmm.
the internal work so that you are aware of your childhood trauma so that you don't then pass that unknowingly down to your kids, right? The residue will be there, right?
Right.
Because you're not going to be completely healed from it. The residue will be there because it's shaped and changed you in ways, and you have no control over how that is going to manifest itself in your relationship with your child or how they're going to respond to that. Because as healed as you think you are, sometimes acting in ways in which you think are the healed version of you somehow then become a trauma to your kids. And I learned this and I did a lot of parenting in the negative, which
Hmm.
was I didn't want to be like my mom in this respect. I didn't want to be like my dad in this respect. So I'm going to do the exact opposite. That's still a very self centered way of parenting. And so your kid misses out on what it is that they really need because you're being directed. Your parenting is directed from your trauma and not who they are,
That's
right?
it.
So many times I've talked to my kids now and realized that in all of my well meaning efforts, that I have somehow traumatized them. And I was like, but I was just doing the thing that I thought, but that's not what they needed. I didn't see them. I saw me. I saw my trauma, right?
Hmm.
So somehow I have transferred that onto them, and I didn't even mean to do it, right? But again, I think it's we if we look at this like a business, if you and your partner have a business like it's online and you're just, I make this or we do a podcast, whatever. The moment that you get a staff, the moment that you get, I'm so sorry, that's Alexa
That's okay.
reminding me of something. But the moment that you get any sort of business front, you get a staff, you get a contract, whatever that is that takes you to the next level, it puts a different level of pressure on your relationship, an unknown, right? Now you have more responsibility.
Right.
And it's that additional responsibility that causes you to lean and depend on your partner in a way that you never had to before. You're responsible for your stuff, they're responsible for their stuff, and now you're responsible for something together. Hold up, wait a minute. Then you see a lot of things in them. Maybe you've already saw them, right? But it wasn't a big deal because they ain't got nothing to do with me.
Right. Right.
They late on their stuff, okay, whatever. And especially with marriages like where things are split 50-50, you have your bills, I got my bills. When you have a kid, even if you structured your finances that way, it doesn't work when you have a kid because there's always something that they're responsible for that will somehow impact you.
Yep.
And that's the real. And that's when stuff starts to hit the fan and you also have arguments that you never thought you would have arguments before. Children change your marriage, right? In some ways for the better, and in some ways it becomes more challenging,
Right.
because you have to lean and depend on your partner in a different way. And sometimes marriages don't survive because of that, because they were only committed to making it work when things are good.
Right. And there's an easy out. And there's an easy out.
There's an easy out. There's an easy out. So yeah, children can be a lot of weight on a marriage. Trauma
Hmm.
also, and I think about this with my husband, and I hear a lot about people coming into a marriage one way, or when they were dating they were one way, and then they get married and then they're completely different. I was definitely that person. First of all, I was that person, even I changed in the midst of us dating
Mm.
because I was dealing with a lot of unhealed trauma, a lot of unhealed sexual trauma. And so the way that I attracted, my husband was just like a lot of sex, a lot of sex, a lot of sex, right?
Right.
I was just going to be whatever it is that he wanted me to be. Like that was my level of control. Then I committed my life to God in the midst of us dating. And then I went to celibacy.
Mm.
And that was a huge change. But again, once we got
Right.
married, it was a lot of sex, a lot of sex, a lot of sex. What I realized is that over the course of our marriage, I started dealing with my unprocessed trauma
Mm.
and I started to receive a lot of healing.
Right.
And my that overly sexual like thing that I would control became more healed, and so it became more regulated,
Right.
right? And then my husband was probably like, okay, what's going
Wait a
on?
minute. I
What's
need the
going on?
trauma
Like
back. I need the
you ain't
trauma
putting out
back.
like you used to, right? You ain't wild and freaky like you used to. But that was because my trauma was showing up.
Right.
The traumatized girl was what I put out
Mm-hmm.
and how I attracted my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became my healed self, my true self, right? So I'm not doing the things that I used to do, right? So that my trauma had a huge impact on my marriage because
Yeah.
my husband probably didn't understand it. Maybe felt it was a rejection of him, or like, like she didn't bamboozle me.
It's not what I signed up for.
And then you add on kids and sort of all of that other
Right.
stuff, right?
Right.
That just breaks down that part of marriage. But yeah, but I see that people, they're representatives, and when we talk about these representatives, a lot of times it's not always a deceptive sort of I'm going to give you what you want.
That's
Sometimes it
true.
is the unhealed person showing up,
Yep.
trying to get their needs met, trying to gain attention because of whatever it is that, whatever there is in need of. And then when they start doing the work, they start changing and they become somebody
Yeah.
different, or they become a healed version of themselves, right? And so
Right.
that is the thing that shows up. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, trauma, yeah. And we want, that's trauma, yes. Your triggers show up in many different ways, how
Yeah.
you respond to your spouse. And I think what I have noticed is that women are probably more in touch with traumas that they've experienced and may or may not be able to trace their who they are right now to that and their reactions. It is much more difficult for men to see themselves as traumatized,
Right.
to then be able to identify the trauma and then even be able to link it back to how they're showing up in the world.
Mhm.
I've had a very difficult time working with men in marriage because they don't see the link. And sometimes they are unwilling to see the link.
Yeah.
I'm persistent, but I've worked with men who carry so much trauma because of absentee fathers, rejection from their parents, rejection from girls, and they become a certain way. Like it is crazy how when I talk to them, usually when I'm talking to the wife, in a heterosexual marriage, when I'm talking to the wife, she's like, yeah, A, B, and C happened to me when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Front and open.
Yeah. Sometimes they can link it to what's showing up for them now. Sometimes they can't. But then when we're talking, there's like, I see, I'm
Mm-hmm.
viewing them as this person, blah, blah, blah. Then, but when I talk to the husbands in heterosexual marriages, it is this like, why are you doing this? Why? And it's like, yeah, I don't know. Well, tell me about your parents. Then it's like, whew, some men break down.
Yeah.
They have never even dealt with it. Oh, they'll say, I never even realized that I was carrying that.
Mm.
Or I'll just ask them the questions because men that I've worked with don't have these internal conversations with themselves. They're not asking themselves why,
With their friends.
or with their friends, right? So they don't see a connection. My husband used to say that all the time. Like, stop asking me why. Like, it just doesn't have to be connected to something.
It does.
I disagree. As a psychology major, as someone with a counseling degree, like it does. It's always connected. There's always a root, right? You're not just who you don't show up in the world being who you are, unrelated or unconnected to things that have happened. You are a culmination of your experiences.
Yeah. And I think also what we have to remember as a woman, if you are blessed, because I will consider it a privilege for a man to open up to you about those vulnerabilities in that space, do not use it against them because that will shut them down forever. And that is so unfair because there already are so many small spaces for them to be
Mm-hmm.
able to be open. Do
Yeah.
not take that space of them opening up to you about something very, very intimate to them, and then using that for your own benefit later, or
Yeah,
using it to hurt them.
that is so,
That's the end of that.
that's so true. You see that on social media, right?
Yeah,
A lot with
yeah,
men who are being vulnerable and women, other men, but women in particular tearing them down. Yeah, you got to hold space for that
yeah,
because it goes against how we're socialized, especially how men are socialized and what is considered to be masculine. And I even have to catch myself like saying some crazy things every now and then, like man up or whatever. And it's like, girl, that toxic masculinity has now impacted you, right? Because we
right,
have very clear, I think, carved out views of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman,
right.
and in relationship in particular. And so you have to be very careful to that point. Yes, you can't use that. You have to create a safe space for them and kind of go with their pace, right? Because sometimes they're not ready and we can't force that out of them, but really use it to kind of inform. One couple that I was
Yeah,
working with, what I realized is that the wife was not, and it dealt with trust, right? She
hmm,
just didn't believe him, right? She just didn't believe him. And when he would say, like, there was no motive behind it, I just did it, right? Because I wanted to, because that's something that I desired. And
yeah,
she wanted more of an explanation. And one of the things that I realized is that, and this isn't about like, oh, your trauma isn't connected, but it's like men are different.
yeah,
Men don't need love in order to be in an external relationship. It could be purely physical
yep,
just to meet those needs, right? And so coming into those conversations with an understanding that just because it will require you to have feelings and emotions to be with someone else, it does not, and are not wired that way. So when you're entering into these spaces where they're being vulnerable, understand, like go into them seeking understanding about how men are wired, because they're wired very differently than we are. Their motivations are different, their needs are different. And so, not to kind of superimpose yours on them to say, yeah, I don't understand that. Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me, right? Go in seeking understanding. And that's not just between dealing with issues, right? Even going when you're talking about the framework or the rules that you're going to create in your marriage, go in seeking understanding.
yeah,
In parenting, when they make a decision that you don't agree with, go in with trying to seek understanding. Tell me why you would allow that, or why you would say that to them, or what were you thinking? Because sometimes in exploring the why, there's a space for empathy and compassion and tolerance and acceptance. You just say something to my kid and it just sounds crazy. I'm just like, why would you do that? But I'm like, hold up, wait a minute. Let's talk about this because I see this as harmful, but tell me why you thought that was a good idea to do that.
hmm,
It's like, well, when I was a kid, da da da. Like, oh, okay. I still don't agree with it, but now I have a space for tolerance because I understand why you said that. That makes sense to me now because you did whatever. So going back, like communication, opening it up, but in order for you to be able to really know and to have true intimacy with your spouse, you got to be able to create a safe space to talk about that trauma,
yeah,
and to start the work of at least healing or processing it, and to see how it's showing up. So, one of the exercises that I have couples do is to kind of share, once we kind of bring it to the surface, then they are to go back and have conversations. And so they can talk about one person's trauma, and then the spouse is to ask questions like, just like, well, how did you feel then? Blah, blah, blah. How do you think it impacted you? And then they have permission to say, now I see why you do A, B, and C. Like, I see how this is showing up in our marriage. They have to do that work of, like, I see, you might not be able to see how your trauma is showing up in our marriage, but I can. Like, I
yeah,
see this now. That makes sense to me that you felt abandoned, which is why, you do A, B, and C. And so it gives space for the spouse to be able to make connections that the other spouse hasn't made or isn't willing to make, right?
yeah.
But it's important because our trauma shows up daily in our
Yes, it
marriage.
does.
And until our eyes are open to it, there's no way for us to even deal with it,
Yeah.
you know? And if I've seen marriages break down, oftentimes it's because the one person is just not willing to acknowledge that there's trauma there, and they're not willing to deal with it. They just want to continue to live in their coping mechanisms. It's like, yeah,
Because your acceptance of your responsibility into a situation doesn't mean that you are lesser in the marriage or that you're the failing partner. All the one of the entities want to know is like, do you accept where we are? And now can we move forward? But if you don't even want to accept it, then
yeah,
that means that you're not going to be willing to do that work and and actually build from there because you don't really see that there's a problem.
yeah,
So
yeah,
and that will destroy a marriage.
yeah. And it's often, and I recognize it's painful,
Yeah.
right? It is very painful. Oftentimes, the way that men are socialized is to bury pain, not to deal with it, not to talk about it, but just swallow it, right?
You'll be all right.
Yeah. And women are socialized, I think, more often to comfort and nurture one another. And so even if we don't share it all, we are more likely to at least within ourselves acknowledge that there's some pain. It
Yeah.
might go unresolved, right? But there's still like a not an sometimes we ignore it. Other times I think we know that it's there, but we just haven't found a safe space to share it.
Yeah.
But a man's ability to take pain and put it somewhere and close the door is unmatched.
Yeah. Yeah, it
It is
is.
unmatched.
But it'll show
Yeah.
up somewhere else. It'll show up in their
Yeah.
heart. It'll show up in
Always.
their health,
It's going
right?
to show up, but
Yeah.
they blind themselves to it
Yeah.
until it gets to a breaking point or until they have someone that they really trust. And sometimes it's a woman that they really trust that kind of who just won't let it go. I know with my son, it used to drive him crazy, but I used to make him talk about what was going on with him. He was like, I don't want to talk about it. Nope, we're going to talk about it. I said, we don't have to talk about it right now, but I'm going to come back. And so I forced him to put language to his feelings and his emotions and his
Yeah.
pain. I need you to I need you to make that connection, not to have this thing living and breathing inside of you and not have a name or not have words to speak to
Yeah.
it. And yeah, and I've he's just very emotionally intelligent because of that. I'm saying,
Yeah.
yeah, kudos to me, but also, but no, but for his willingness to yield in that way.
Yeah.
Um, and it's important to give words to your pain and to teach our especially our young boys, our young girls as well, but definitely our young boys, because they're not going to get that in the world won't be encouraging that at all, and which is why we have emotionally unintelligent intelligent men. It's why we marry to men who can't give voices and words to their emotions, and marriages suffer because of that. So
Mhm.
we have to be able to do that and teach that and model that.
These next couple of generations, that's a whole nother podcast of its own. But I told Danielle we were gonna do 15 minutes. We've been here for an hour and some change. But
I already
but
told you.
because this is so important. This is really important. I think the conversation is really good, and I think it's the things that we just don't talk about when
Hmm.
we're considering marriage. Just I would wrap it up this way. One final thought from you. What would you say to someone, male or woman, considering marriage? What would you say? What advice would you give them today?
Two things: get in therapy, individual therapy, and get into, if you have decided that you want to be married and you're looking for a partner and you meet somebody, I would get into therapy sooner rather than later. Don't get engaged and get into therapy, because then you have all of these expectations that have been set. And so if you realize like this isn't the one, you're less likely to drop it once you're
Hmm.
engaged and once you start wedding planning. There's nothing wrong with you as an individual who's dating to get first individual therapy, but to say, hey, this is actually somebody that I'm really interested in pursuing a relationship with. I need to be able to explore their willingness to deal with their stuff. I need to explore my willingness to deal with it, and whether or not this is a good partnership, right? And I think a skilled therapist is going to be able to help you navigate those conversations. So I think we get things backwards in that way. The other thing is, and I learned this from my sister who learned this from her pastor, date in community. Oftentimes, and I see this all the time, it's like we're dating somebody, oh, I don't want to introduce them to my family yet. I don't know. And then a year in, that we're making these grand pronouncements and we're introducing them to folks. We already fell in love with them.
Right.
And our family can spot things in them and in us that sometimes we miss those red flags. And so my sister said that her pastor was like, no, you date them in community. You bring them around. My mama used to tell me, date a whole bunch of people. Don't just date one. So I was always bringing people around. But it was,
right.
Maybe and people, they thought I was fast. Okay, but whatever. But if my father didn't like them, they wouldn't be back, right? Yeah. And so having people that you love and care about you, that are discerning, having that as a sort of a sounding board when you're dating, that's really, really important. Because especially for us, for people who are really, really yearning and wanting to be married, sometimes we just want it so badly that we're willing to dive in, right? Mm-hmm. Or sometimes we have some characters that they're just liars. They're just deceivers, right? And we haven't picked up on it. But discerning folks will be able to see it and say, baby, something ain't right. I can't put my finger on it, but something isn't right. So all of this secrecy, I'm not going to talk about my relationship. Just no. I think when you're in the dating stage and you know that you might be prone to pick somebody that, especially if you have a history of picking people, bring them around folks. That's going to be key. It's going to save you a lot of heartache down the road. But therapy is key for you to do the work on self so that the healed versions of you are picking that person. Yep.
That's probably my favorite thing that you said today. And like you said, it's not always bad, even if the parts of you that are not healed, because it still worked for your good. In some cases it'll work in the good, in some cases it won't. But making sure that healed version of you is helping you make that decision into who your partner is. I love that, and the imagination and assumption.
Whew.
Thank you for checking out our marriage episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some good things, some good takeaways that you can have conversation on at home, in your own life and in your own marriage, or even what you aspire to have in marriage. But thank you for checking it out, and please tune in for our next episode.